the interesting thing about America at the moment is it's run by two people in terms of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who I would imagine from a psychoanalysis point of view would be just about as fascinating a subject as you could possibly get. We've talked about Trump, but what do you make of Elon Musk and the whole Doge thing, but also the vicious reaction from the woke left, who of course originally had him as their green energy savior?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me in the least if half the money that the American government spent, the Canadian government as well, the British government, governments as such, is like utter waste. And worse than that, like positively counterproductive. And it's certainly the case that Musk is the kind of managerial businessman who's very detail oriented. He's an engineer. Engineers know how things work from the atoms upward. I have many engineers as friends, and I've watched them run companies, and the good ones know everything about how their enterprises operate, and they pay attention to every detail. And Musk is definitely one of those people. And we know that because he's done 5 impossible things at least. And then he bought Twitter and he cut its staff by 75% and made it work better, despite the fact that his advertising base collapsed. And he did that despite the fact as well that everyone thought it was a mad move, economically and practically. And so I think it's great that Musk and his team of brilliant young engineers are going through the budget line by line, trying to figure out where all the idiot money goes. And I think the left is appalled by that because they've set up an entire network of so-called non-governmental agencies, organizations, NGOs, that are essentially funded by taxpayer money that run their, quasi-criminal radical enterprises all around the world. And now the gravy train has ceased to operate. And so it's not surprising they're unhappy about that. But thank God for that, as far as I'm concerned, especially given the catastrophic levels of debt that the American government, Western governments everywhere are carrying. This is absolutely necessary. The left is skeptical of big business because they don't trust capitalists, even though capitalists have made the world wealthy and almost eradicated absolute poverty all around the world, especially since the Berlin Wall fell, and done that far more cleanly than socialist or communist governments everywhere by a huge amount. Apparently, the radicals think that big government is trustworthy, even though big is the problem. And this is also what Carney believes fervently, to believe that they could operate by central planning principles and make the world a much better place. And we know what happens when that happens, Pierce. We know what's happened to Germany, where energy prices are 5 times what they should be, and they cause more pollution than they did 10 years ago before these idiot green policies were put in place. Then there's you characters in the UK, and you guys can't even make steel anymore. And if you think that's progress, well, then you deserve the poverty that's coming down the pipes at you very, very rapidly. And there's no evidence whatsoever that any of these policies have produced even the tiniest transformation in levels of carbon dioxide output, especially not with China and India thinking that the West has gone out of its mind absolutely and, making their own way forward to an industrial future.
Now, the other way that we will chip away at this is what Elon is doing with Doge, because that is just rampant money going out the door.
Turns out it's a little suspect if he's chipping away at that stuff, but then he's still getting government grants for Tesla and SpaceX and all this stuff.
Bro, can I just set the record? Okay, he's a friend of mine, so whatever, I'm biased, but let me just set the record straight. He got a $500 million support for Tesla during Obama. He paid that back early. He paid it with interest, and he paid it with an early prepayment penalty. Okay, so I just want you to know that is the facts. Yes, he got $500 million, but the other fact is this is the only person I've ever heard of in my life who's actually gotten some form of subsidy from the government, paid it back on time, actually ahead of schedule, with interest, with a prepayment penalty. So whatever you think of the guy, I just want you guys to know that is the actual facts of what happened in the early 2010s. And what did it do? It revolutionized our even awareness of all this stuff, meaning If Elon had not created these electric cars and all of that technology, we would be even further behind today. Like, you got to appreciate what this guy does. I remember we had the opening party of the Gigafactory, and it's like outside of Reno somewhere or whatever. Like, I don't know, it was in Nevada. We drove there. The factory literally takes raw material, like shit that comes in on like train conveyor belts, and out pops the Model Y on the other end of it. You're like, how did somebody? So, and in a moment where the whole world was going berserk, and Obama felt like, which, you know, I give him a real solid for this. Obama did the right thing, but then Elon did way more to, you know, just to pay it back, to settle it with the government and the people to make it right. And then all this technology that he's created, I cannot tell you guys, we would be so behind.
I think that I don't know if anybody here is critical of the technological advancements or the investment in the future of America's manufacturing and engineering programs, like keeping us competitive 100%. I do think it's fine to look at certain things and be critical of Elon in the way that maybe Doge could potentially benefit him or not. But I think it's okay to look at that. The question here is, though, if Doge finds a way to create savings, much to the chagrin of many people, but if it do find a way to make savings, and those savings offset that money that the tariffs were going to pay, then the savings can go to the debt. And then you have tariffs offsetting the income tax. And now you have no income tax and you are chipping away at debt.
In relation to the way, like I said, the woke left has now turned on Elon Musk, it's purely because he flipped sides and decided to support Trump because he found he had nothing in common with the woke left. I completely agree with him. I have nothing in common with them either. But his punishment is that all these people who love to have be kind hashtags on their bios on social media promptly went out and started torching Tesla dealerships and attacking people in Tesla cars and so on, you know, reacting with violence against somebody for political reasons. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, I think that's a warning to everyone, because there's a tremendous false morality in the planetary savior posturing of the radical left. The anti-capitalist planetary saving posturing is we're moral agents because we're on the side of the planet. There's a catastrophe coming down on us that warrants all intervention. All we have to do to be moral people is proclaim to be on the side of Mother Earth, and that justifies everything. Well, what do you mean by everything? Well, how about violence in service of your moral rectitude? Yep, looks like that's justifiable. How about keying your neighbor's Tesla to show just what a stellar moral individual you are, what an utter Pharisee you truly are? And you can see the line between mere moral posturing in service of these putative goals, saving the planet, let's say, and anti-capitalism. You can see that that has the proclivity to turn into violence at the drop of a hat. And here's the excuse. The world's greatest industrialist is trying to go through the budget line by line, which, by the way, is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. And his reward is that the radicals decide that he's enemy number one and do everything they can, not even to undermine him, although that's happening, but to target people who've bought green vehicles from the most effective electric car manufacturer in the world. Yeah, and that's what? That's progressive logic. Progressive, right? You know, Pierce, one of the things I've figured out, there's this finding in the psychological literature that people become more conservative as they get older. And that's actually not the right way to read that data. The right way to read that data is that progressive policy, that infantile, hedonistic, self-centered progressive policy, is nothing but the political expression of radical immaturity. And that, like, classical liberalism and classic small c conservatism is something that you have to learn how to manage painfully as you get older. And so the reason that those Marxist doctrines and the socialist, hedonistic, we're going to take care of you for the rest of your life doctrines don't go away despite all the evidence that they're pathological to the core is because they are really nothing but the political expression of radical immaturity. And so that's a much better way of looking at it psychologically, because otherwise it's a mystery. Like, why do these ideas never go away, despite the fact that they've been demonstrated time and time again to be utterly counterproductive? Why does Eastern Europe think that the West has lost its mind, turning to these policies that destroyed them for 70 years? Well, the answer is that if you haven't grown up, you look to progressive hedonism as the expression of your failure to develop. And that's what we're seeing playing out in the West. It's probably a pathology of wealth, because it's easy to be over-coddled and turn to irresponsible hedonism and to presume that that's the appropriate political stance. And the leftists, and we can see where that leads. And I think the Tesla example is a great one. It's like the border between that holier than thou radicalism and the idiot violence that's actually merely targeting people who bought a Tesla. There's no line at all. And we should pay very, very careful attention to that.
You spoke at a rally, I think it was on Sunday, and you pulled up a chart. Here's that chart. Maybe you could explain to the American people here what this chart shows.
Yeah, so I can step back and say how I got it, because I think it's important. Sure. We map, the way we work, you guys know we're very operational, Valerie. I've worked with all you guys various times. Yeah. And what we do is we map the entire system from beginning to end. So we map the system from enumeration, it's how you get your number, all the way to the end, went to the offices and saw how the offices operate. And in that process, one of our engineers, Peyton, who I mentioned, he found the data. So we're looking at all the data enumeration, how it works, what's going on, the typical stuff you'd look at. And he found this data called enumeration beyond entry, right? It had this giant ramp to it. You can see their baseline was 300,000 people, all the way up to 2.1 million people. And that just jumped out at us. And we're like, what's that? And so we dug into it. And that's how this started.
And so what that's showing is Social Security numbers that were issued to non-American citizens or non-citizens. Am I correct? That's the number we're looking at. So these are non-citizens getting security numbers. And for people who don't know, just like a little bit of background on the Social Security system, we do this. This is not abnormal for us to give Social Security numbers. This is part of the process that the government does. The Social Security number was created in 1936 for citizens to track their earnings. And in the 90s, we started giving them to non-citizens who were authorized to work in the US so that we could collect taxes from them. And so if you're not a citizen and you're a green card holder, which some people in this program I think have been, you have to have a Social Security number in order to work, and you pay into Social Security and Medicare just like US citizens. And then eventually, I think you would qualify for those over some period of time.
You can also get a Social Security number if you're a legal immigrant into the United States on a visa. So for example, when I first came to the United States 25 years ago on a TN visa, I was able to get my Social Security number because I had a valid visa to be in the United States.
Okay. Yeah. So we have Social Security numbers being given to non-citizens. That is not controversial, but there's something controversial about this chart. Antonio, tell us what that is.
I think if you look at the chart, you'll see it starts at call it 300,000 or so.
This is during the COVID period, yeah?
Coming right out of it. So the 21 is coming right out of COVID, right? So if you go back even a couple of years, 19, you'll see that it's about 400,000. Yeah, exactly 350 right there. So what happened was this program was designed for some people you're talking about, people that got visas. This is at enumeration beyond entry. So this is after you're in. There are some people in here that have H-1Bs, green cards, et cetera. And the way we thought about this was that's the baseline number. That's the 300,000 to 400,000 a year. There are programs for Afghans, example, the translators that came in after the war, right? The people we brought in, they would be in these kinds of programs. And so the baseline number, and by the program goes back, this particular program goes back all the way to 17, and it had a legitimate use, which was the kind of people we're talking about. People that we want to let in, like the CARE program, I'll make an example, which is the Afghans, they would be in this number. And so what jumped out at us wasn't that this is here because it has legitimate use. It's that it's the growth. Why did it grow this fast? And what happened? That's what we dug into.
Have you figured that out yet? Is it because of the COVID overhang? The one criticism I did see of the chart that I wanted to bring up with you is, hey, people want to see the 10 years, 20 years before this. What would we see if we were to look backwards a little bit? And do you have some theories? And is the COVID overhang theory valid? Or is this just Biden opened the border, as we saw, especially in maybe it was that third year of his term, the 2023 year, and this is the overhang of the 2023 surge. What are your theories?
Well, the answer is no, but categorically no, because the program really started, it started in 2017. So they probably worked on it before that, right? It takes a few years to put these into place. They worked at it, my guess is, back during the Obama administration. It actually became active in 17. You see a few numbers in 18, and it starts to get a little bigger in 19 and 20, right? That's how we get this baseline number of 19 and 20. That's where we're using that data here. And then when we dug into it, what we found was the vast majority of the growth was related to asylum programs and parolees and people that came in on NTAs, this is notice to appear, into the country, either at the border, at the airports, mostly at the border. And then we dug further into it. We found that this is about 5.4 million people total. There were about 1.2 million people that the status was marked as unknown, and about 1.2 million people that were marked as general parole. And they should have markings of, what the program is they're under. Because if you claim asylum, you're supposed to claim like a real fear. I'm going to be tortured by my country. Something bad's going to happen to me, so I can't go home. What we find here is that a legitimate program was abused. The requirements were super opened so that more people come through. And the example I'll give you, I have here actually, the form used to be, going back in time, a 4-page form that the officer had to fill out in the field. And the person that was claiming asylum had to actually prove that they had a really credible fear of being, murdered, tortured by their government. That's something bad would happen. That's what asylum's for. It turned into a form, which I can't give you, but I'm going to show you here. If you zoom in on it, it has 4 questions. That's it. And the 4 questions are super leading. I'll just read one of the important ones here, right? So, do you have any reason for a concern about being returned to your home country or being removed from the United States? What they did is they just opened the aperture on these programs dramatically. So they allowed people that were illegals at the border to come in legally. And as we've dug further into it, we found this took us, I'm a very methodical, lean business process mapper. And we went all the way to the border, literally to Brownsville and Laredo, to ask what happened. We couldn't find the data on what these unknown categories were. And it turns out that when the folks at the border, who were great, by the way, they really tried hard and they suffered a lot in this. This is a human tragedy I haven't talked about. They were giving people at times notices to appear. This is the NTA. And what that allows you to do is come in the country, and then you're scheduled a court date, which is like 6 years out. So now you're in the country with some quasi-legal status. You're waiting for your court date. And while you're waiting for your court date, which could be 6 years out is the average, by the way, it could be longer than that. So without even an interview, just an application by filing a form. Once the application's in, you can file another form, 765, to get a work authorization. Once you get that, you get a 766, which is the authorization, and we automatically send you a Social Security card in the mail. No interview at all. That is the majority of the growth you see in these numbers.
Is there any ID verification along the way, Antonio? Like, do we know that there are no duplications happening by validating that one individual is getting one Social Security number at any point in this process?
So it's a great question. No, the answer is there's no real ID verification. So you can, one of the things we found, we looked at this was the people that some people showed IDs, some people didn't. And one of the things
these would
really
be IDs, Antonio, from their home country. This would be a Venezuelan driver's license or something.
Yeah, it could be a passport, a driver's license. But here's what really sort of tipped us off and disturbed us. When we looked at the birth certificate data that was presented at the border, the number one birth date was 1/1, and it was 4 times more likely to be born on 1/1 than any other day of the year.
Do we take biometrics of people at the border? Do we take like an iris scan, fingerprints, and all that stuff?
This is one of the issues. We do have photos of people. We found that 23% of the records looked at did not have fingerprints. The folks at the border were overwhelmed. And we're not sure why this happened. When I went down there, both Border Patrol and Border Protection told me they had the highest suicide rates of all time during the surge. Over 70 agents committed suicide in this period. It's truly tragic because they knew what was going on.
Given the fact that all this has happened, is the Trump administration going to try to claim the Social Security numbers back, invalidate them? What will be the proper action, or is it too late? Are they already sort of in the system and now you can't do anything about it?
So Ben, it's a great question, right? And the first question was, what are they doing? Where are these people? Where are they? How are they? And we've gone through a whole process of mapping this. So we mapped it through to the benefit programs. We found in the benefit programs that every benefit program we looked at was being accessed by these people. 1.3 million of them are on Medicaid right now, today. And by the way, it's just ramping. It's just starting. I couldn't sleep. My mind was right on this. I sent the engineers a note saying, hey guys, let's just look at the public voter rolls, who we find in some friendly states. And we looked at the voter rolls and we found that thousands of them were registered to vote in a handful of states. And then we went even further with those friendly states and found that many of those people had actually voted. It was shocking to us. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. And so now the question we're asking ourselves is, what do we do? We referred some to prosecution. That's ongoing right now. We're thinking through how to do it. And the reality is they have various kinds of status, and it's a very detailed analysis legally that we're working through right now about how to deal with it.
So thousands of those people registered to vote.
Yes.
In the election.
Which is a federal crime, by the way.
Well, yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is, like, the Heritage Foundation has a very good project, it's obviously right-leaning, where they're studying all cases of fraud. I looked at it before we were here. There's only been 24 cases since 2003 of somebody who's a non-citizen trying to vote. Now, those are people caught. So this would be incredibly dramatic if it was even 1,000 people.
Oh, no, Jason, it's more than 1,000. I've seen it. I've seen the data myself, and it's more than 1,000 in just a couple of states. I mean, it is shockingly bad. And this is the tip of the iceberg, guys. It's the tip of the iceberg. This doesn't include these 7.8 million people that ICE has that have come in illegally and know are here, and all the people that came illegally we don't know are here. I mean, this is not a political issue. I want to be really clear about this.
Yeah, Antonio,
this is about America.
When you get a social security number, what you're saying is there's all of these important downstream consequences. One of the downstream consequences is you could show up, register to vote, and that's an illegitimate action that's breaking federal law. That's one. But the second is that without knowing who this person is, they can start to absorb resources that could have otherwise gone to an American. I guess that's a fundamental part of this.
Yeah.
And so how do you quantify that? Can you just maybe explain it a little bit more about all of the different ways in which you think now, the United States ends up leaking services to these folks?
And also they could be contributing too, right? They could be paying taxes into the system. So I guess there's both of those possibilities, and both of those have fingerprints to them up. So yeah, good question.
Look, we need to figure this out. This is it's massively complex. And every benefit program we looked at, and this is just a handful of states, we found people on all the benefit programs, and we found them on unemployment, we found them on Medicaid. So Jason, to your point, the people on Medicaid and unemployment, they're not contributing. They're taking out, they're mooching, right?
Sure.
There are criminals. I mean, look, we sent this data list to the National Targeting Center. I don't want to get too far into the data, but I can tell you they found hard hits in the Targeting Center of very bad people, criminals and people on the terrorist watch list that are in this group. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a problem. We got to figure out how to deal with it. And of course, there are people that are also, have jobs and paying in the system. That's also true. All these things are true. And we're trying to sort through the data and figure out how to actually deal with it now.
Antonio, one of the things about the data that you triggered is a lot of people started to try to find a way to nitpick and say, Antonio, you're cherry picking, or Antonio, this is not really representative. And you had some pretty big names, right? People that have credibility. Jim Chanos probably being one of the more prolific people, a very well-known hedge fund manager. But I think you tried to articulate why their objections didn't make any sense. I think it's important to maybe give you a few moments here to identify what they said and maybe debunk it.
So the chart that they're using, and you can see this, I posted something on X about this. It was apples to oranges. You can see it here. They took a chart that included all enumerations, not the EBE program, the enumeration beyond entry program, all enumerations, and compared to our chart.
This would have included somebody like me coming in on a TN visa or somebody on an EB1 visa.
Yeah, I mean, those people would be in our data too, but just enumerated beyond entry. The data on the left, up to 2020 with the big bars, that includes people in the offices, that includes people that got social security numbers because they went to a consulate and, like you probably did, applied ahead of time before they came in, those kinds of people.
So your number for 24 was how much? 2.1 million. Right?
Yep. And what they did is they took our data. So this was, look, I don't want to impute negative motives. They just maybe were confused. They took our data and they added the total data, right? This is just subsection. This is EB. And I'm just going to use the acronyms. Okay, guys. This is EB only, enumeration beyond entry, which is a program, as I said, started in 2017. And then it kind of ramped up into 19. They took our data and then they added the total data before that, right? That is apples to oranges. That's why it doesn't work. And I went through a whole analysis of this on X. And, the first person that posted the chart actually deleted it and sent me a post saying, hey, I'm deleting it because I get it. You're right. And apologized and asked me some questions. I don't want to get into debates with people. It's not worth it. The data speaks for itself.
We get frustrated because we look around and we see stuff not happening. And you just pointed out, here's one reason why things can't happen. Sometimes there's people in place for long periods of time, right, and it prevents you from doing something.
Bring up Doge. I don't want this to become politicized because I understand how people feel about Elon. And I understand how they feel about swaths of people getting fired and losing their ability to provide for their families. If that is exactly what's happening, I have empathy for those people as well, right? I think as a normal human being. Right. But is there a, let's say, more delicate way to go into some of the permanent government and make it more efficient, which would help everyday New Yorkers? Does that mean that there's more money for other programs? Right. Should we look into permanent government in every municipality, see if there's some blow?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Listen.
How do you even say that without people going, oh, they're trying to Doge?
You got to ignore the noise, brother. Okay. You got to, my claim to fame is that I know I love this city and I love the people in this city. And I don't care what you call me. I don't care how much you yell at me. I don't care how you call names. You're not going to tell me that people should be sleeping on the streets. And you can call me whatever you want. I'm not gonna allow them to sleep on the street. You're not gonna tell me that we should have guns in our community. We took 20,800 guns off our streets, almost 1,500 just this year alone, and we're seeing the results of that. And so you have to go into government not saying, okay, let me just say the right things. You have to go in being your honest, authentic self. And that's what we do every day. We're not going to solve all the problems. Right. But you can't tell me we continue to spend this much money and then have 40% of our children reading and writing at grade level.
Yeah, it just doesn't.
All over the country.
Yeah. That's the thing. There just has to be a better way. That's why I hate that the Doge thing has become so politicized, because I think most Americans agree, we don't want there to be waste.
I all agree. They get upset. The Trump derangement syndrome is real. Yeah. Yeah. You can hate someone so much that even if they do something
You're blind to it.
Right.
Yeah.
You know that? And you can like or dislike Elon, but you don't have any right blowing up someone's Tesla.
Right.
You don't have any right. Yeah. Who do you think you are? You don't have any right going in and destroying.
They drew a dick on his Tesla.
I'm sorry about that, by the way.
That's not what I'm saying?
Now, to be fair,
they should get 40 years.
But that's a hypocrisy when you say, okay, I'm upset that you are doing Doge and you're closing down jobs, but you know what? You should close down Tesla. What about those people that work there?
Dude, I literally said that. I was on this guy's podcast and I was like, listen, I totally understand you. Theo Vaughn's podcast. And I was like, I totally understand that you people who are critical of Elon, there's reasons to be critical. Everybody should have the freedom to be critical. Right. And I go, but hoping that Tesla shuts down.
Right.
I understand you're upset that people lost jobs. It doesn't improve the situation if you make more people lose jobs.
Right.
It is an American car company.
Right. Yeah, he's the richest guy in the world. He's going to be okay.
Right.
He's not the one hurt. The people that work there. So you're upset these people lost jobs. You're like, I know the solution. More people lose jobs.
Think about it. It's the irrational thought process that people are lining up. I just want to hurt each other. I want you to feel pain. And God forbid if you say I'm not playing that game. Okay, then I'm gonna cancel you. Cancel me. You know what I'm saying?
You went through, I think, the biggest cancellation attempt where they were just you could see it was I remember in those few weeks where it was a decision had been made. We're going after Joe Rogan. And they just emptied every bullet they had, and it all just bounced off you. And then you see this with a lot of other people, Alex Jones, Andrew Tate. However you feel about these guys. I'm not even making a comment on.
You just make them bigger.
I'm just saying that them getting kicked off every platform has not worked at all. And
it doesn't work anymore.
And that's great. And Daryl's another example of that too, where they tried to go after him, and it just was not happening. Just made him bigger.
So they're going to have to adjust or go away, adjust or perish. And I assume they're going to perish. I don't see them adjusting. The only thing that could change is the people that own them, like Jeff Bezos has kind of put the clamps down on the Washington Post and said, look, I don't want any of these fucking crazy left-wing opinion pieces anymore. I want you to report about lifestyle, health, news, objective news. Like, let's become a fucking newspaper again, which is that's the only way you have value with everybody. Otherwise, you're alienating literally 50% of the country, and the 50% that buy it, they have to be retarded because you've been lying so openly about so many different things. Everything has to be gone through a filter.
It's not even just that they're lying, but that they're lying in such a brazen, such a 180 degree from reality. You know, like the way they've tried to make this threat of Doge, you know, like where they're just kind of like, you know, what right does he have to go through all these bureaucrats' emails and what? And when you zoom out, it reminds me a lot. There's this weird parallel between like what Bobby Kennedy was able to insert with the Maha movement, where you had this thing where we had like what they'd call a national health crisis, you know, a pandemic, like all of our focus has to be on this health issue. And then Bobby Kennedy just kind of came along and was like, can I point out that like there's a real health crisis that we have that's not the one you're talking about at all? Like, you're claiming to care about health so much, and it's like, okay, look at autism and diabetes and obesity, and we lead the world in chronic illness, heart disease, like all these things, like that's kind of. And then it was just the Doge thing. It was like, okay, so we have the U.S. federal government is the biggest organization in the history of the world. We spend more than any other government in the history of the world has ever spent. We are so far in debt now that the interest on the debt is now, I believe last year it was $1.2 trillion, and it's going up. And the interest on the debt is now overtaking the entire budget. Like, I remember when $1 trillion deficits were crazy. If we balanced our budget tomorrow, we still run $1 trillion deficit every year just because we owe it on the interest on the debt. This is so obviously a crisis. And then they're trying to convince you that the real crisis is that Elon Musk and a few of his genius nerd buddies want to open the books? Like, how the fuck can you convince anyone of that?
Well, the Democrats are really good at having a narrative and then marching with it.
Yeah.
They're really good at it. And that's what you see with all these tweets that are all from the same kind of verbiage. They're using the same sentences, and you see them all throughout. Whenever it comes to certain issues, they're really good at getting out this one message.
Yep, which does work to kind of shockingly well. But again, it is like you can watch it. Like, it's like this thing that's getting diminishing returns. And it's like, oh, it's not the same old thing isn't working